Hello, relationship violence class. We only have 2 weeks of reading articles left. So the week that's coming up is focused on perpetrator treatment options, what is and is not effective. So we have 4 articles as usual. The first article I suggest you read is by Turhan. By the way, I've chosen all articles this week published in the last 5 or 10 years. So these are all pretty recent updates. So the first one, Turhan, is basically just a nice intro article because it reviews 3 common approaches to perpetrator treatment: cognitive behavioral therapy, that's the CBT, feminist approaches, and the Duluth model, which we've talked about briefly previously in this class, but it'll be a nice way for you to refresh your memory on what the Duluth model is. And so that's kind of the first half of the article. And then the second half of the article is talking about whether different treatments are differentially effective for different kinds of perpetrators. So they point out as an example that people who come from ethnic minorities might have to have different approaches because you need to be culturally sensitive as counselors or therapists. So they talk about things like a strengths approach, which helps people emphasize what they're good at as opposed to only focusing on what they're bad at. It talks about allowing men to be vulnerable in those sessions and a couple of other examples. So hopefully you find that first article kind of interesting. The second one, also published in 2019, is a meta-analysis. So I know that's not the most exciting kind of article for you to read, but you should have a couple of examples of meta-analyses by the time you graduate. So here's one that's pretty straightforward. A meta-analysis is when they review a lot of articles on a single topic and they try to find themes or patterns, basically. So this was a meta-analysis of 13 studies that were chosen to be reviewed in this article because they all had a pre-test and a post-test measure of perpetrators who had gone through treatment. So basically, they conclude that there's no single therapy that seems to work for everyone, which we kind of already knew. They also conclude that the ones that seem to work best usually have not just therapy for the actual perpetration of violence, but also therapy or counseling for trauma that the people have experienced themselves and people who are using substance abuse, using illegal substances, basically. So, so that's kind of an interesting perspective. I hope you enjoyed that article. The third article is the longest article, but I chose it because it's the qualitative article for this week, and it's typed like in Microsoft Word form, so it's not going to take you as long to read as it looks when you first print it or look at it on your computer. So this is basically an article that we mentioned earlier in the semester, and I'm bringing it back because it's suggesting a new kind of therapy that the other articles are not going to discuss. So this new kind of therapy is called restorative justice, and basically their brand is called Circles of Peace, if that sounds familiar. We talked about it earlier in the semester. One thing I like about this article is that it includes both male and female perpetrators, and it has a control group and an experimental group. The control group is people who receive just traditional BIP, which stands for Batterer Intervention Program treatment. So people are receiving this sort of traditional therapy. And then their experimental group has the traditional therapy plus the Circles of Peace component to it. That's the restorative justice component. So Circles of Peace includes a couple of additional aspects to therapy, like confronting the perpetrator about their attitudes in more kind of realistic ways. It also includes several sessions that include the victim attending or victim advocate attending, and the facilitator of the session really confronting the perpetrator and making the perpetrator take responsibility for what they've done and try to somehow, in a realistic way, kind of make up for what they've done in some kind of restorative way. So it's an interesting idea. I'm curious as to what you are going to think about whether it's promising or not. The last article is very short. It's only 4 pages long, and I've included it because it's a controversial article in that it suggests, it was not published in the year 2914. It was published in the year 2014. Sorry about that typo. But it's basically suggesting that sometimes in this domestic violence situation, we should actually have couples counseling, most counselors are going to say that couples counseling is a really bad idea for domestic violence because it includes victim blaming a lot of the time. But they're going to argue that occasionally couples counseling might actually be helpful. And they're specifically going to talk about the Johnson articles that we've read before, where they're going to say couples counseling isn't usually good for intimate terrorism, but it might be good for what Johnson called common couple violence, or in his later article called situational couple violence. It's the same thing, right? The terminology just changed. So they're going to say basically if both couple members are involved in the perpetration, then maybe they should both be in therapy sessions together. So I hope you enjoy these articles. We are almost done. We only have this week and then the one more week. So good luck, and I look forward to your thoughts.